Have you ever noticed that the harder you try to convince someone, the more they dig in their heels? You present the perfect facts, the most logical arguments, and yet they resist you at every turn. Why does this happen? Because humans are not rational beings. We are emotional ones, and our first instinct is always to protect our ego. In this masterclass, we are decoding the law of defensive behavior. We are going beyond basic persuasion. You will learn how to bypass the internal armor everyone carries, master the art of validation, and use the indirect strategy to make others move in your direction without them ever realizing they're being led. If you're tired of hitting walls and ready to become a master of social influence, this is the key. Stop pushing, start guiding. Let's dive in. We often assume that if we are logical, persuasive, and honest, people will naturally agree with us. We believe that presenting the truth is enough to change a mind, but human nature is far more complex and, frankly, more resistant than that. Every person carries an internal armor, a set of defensive walls built up over years of experience, pain, and conditioning. When you try to influence them, you are not just speaking to their mind, you are knocking on that armor. The biggest mistake most people make is to try and push through this resistance. They argue harder, they use more facts, or they pressure the other person to see reason. This only triggers a more intense defensive reaction. The more you push, the more the other person retreats into their shell. They don't hear your words, they hear an attack on their autonomy and their identity. To master the law of defensive behavior, you must first stop being a pusher. Instead, become a master of the approach. You must learn to lower the defenses of others before you even attempt to plant an idea in their minds. Think of it like trying to enter a fortress. If you throw yourself against the gate, you will be repelled. But if you find the hidden entrance, if you speak to their insecurities, their secret desires, or their need for validation, the gate opens for you voluntarily. This is the core of influence. It is never about forcing your will upon others. It is about creating the conditions where they feel comfortable enough to lower their guard. Once that armor is down, they are no longer listening to defend themselves. They are listening to understand you. This transition from defender to listener is the first step toward true power, and it is the foundation upon which all successful social and professional interactions are built. Once you understand that people are naturally resistant, the next step is to master the most powerful tool for lowering that resistance: validation. Think about the last time you felt truly understood. When someone actually listened to your perspective without immediately jumping in to correct you, didn't you feel your guard drop? That is the power of validation. Most people enter a conversation with their own agenda. They are waiting for their turn to speak, planning their next counter-argument, or looking for flaws in what the other person is saying. This is precisely why the other person stays defensive. When you make the conversation about your own ego or your own ideas, you are confirming their suspicion that you are a threat to their autonomy. To shift this, you must adopt the strategic listener mindset. You need to focus entirely on the other person's world. Ask yourself, what are they afraid of? What do they value? When they speak, resist the urge to debate. Instead, validate their experience. Use phrases like, "I can see why you would feel that way," or "that makes complete sense given your background." You are not necessarily agreeing with their facts or their logic. You are validating their reality. By doing this, you are telling their defensive armor, "I am not here to attack you. I am here to understand you." When a person feels heard and validated, they experience a chemical release of relief. They stop looking for traps in your words and start looking for connection. This creates a state of psychological safety. Once they feel safe, their need to defend their position disappears. They stop being rigid and become fluid. This is not manipulation, it is social intelligence. By validating them, you are effectively disarming them. You are transforming a potential adversary into an ally who is now open to your influence. In the previous parts, we explored how to stop pushing against resistance and how to use validation to disarm others. Now we must address the most challenging aspect of this law: dealing with the rigid mind. Some people have built their defensive walls so thick that simple validation isn't enough to reach them. These individuals are often defined by their inflexibility. They cling to their opinions as if they are life-saving anchors, and any attempt to suggest a different perspective feels like a personal betrayal to them. When dealing with such a person, you must avoid the direct approach at all costs. If you point out the flaws in their reasoning, you only make them double down on their errors. Their rigidity is not based on facts, it is based on fear. They are afraid that if they admit they might be wrong, they will lose their standing or their sense of self. To influence a rigid mind, you must use the indirect strategy. Instead of presenting your own ideas, lead them to discover those ideas as if they were their own. Ask questions that prompt them to think through the problem themselves. By guiding them through a process of self-discovery, you allow them to arrive at your conclusion without feeling pressured. You are simply the architect of the path they are walking on. Furthermore, you must be patient. You cannot force someone to change their mind in a single conversation. If you notice they are becoming defensive or tense, pull back immediately. Give them space. The goal is not to win the argument today. The goal is to keep the channel of communication open. By remaining calm and non-threatening, you show them that you are not there to conquer them. Over time, this consistency will soften their rigidity. They will eventually learn that you are a safe person to interact with, and that trust is the key that finally opens the vault. Sometimes, the most effective way to lead someone is by not appearing to lead at all. When you are too transparent with your agenda, people instinctively pull away because they perceive your influence as an attempt to control them. To overcome this, you must master the art of indirect influence. This involves framing your ideas not as commands or direct suggestions, but as observations that align perfectly with the other person's existing interests and goals. Instead of saying, "You should do this," you must learn to ask questions that lead them to the conclusion you desire. By aligning your objectives with their underlying motivations, you effectively lower the barrier of suspicion. When you remove the pressure to conform, the other person feels a sense of autonomy and control, which makes them far more likely to embrace your influence without even realizing they are being led. This is the difference between a manipulator who is easily spotted and a strategist who remains invisible. You must also learn to utilize the power of suggestion. When you plant a seed of an idea, give the other person the space to grow it themselves. If they feel that the thought originated in their own mind, they will protect it with the same conviction as if it were their own original discovery. This is the highest form of influence. You guide them toward your desired outcome, but you allow them to keep the credit. By prioritizing their need for ego preservation over your own desire to be right, you create a cooperative environment where defenses naturally dissolve. Remember, people will rarely fight against a conclusion they believe they reached on their own. We have explored the anatomy of resistance, the art of validation, the softening of rigid minds, and the subtle power of indirect influence. Now we must synthesize these lessons into a final cohesive strategy, mastering the defensive landscape of every interaction. Understanding the law of defensive behavior is not about becoming a chameleon who changes their personality for everyone. It is about becoming a high-level strategist who understands that power is negotiated through the management of emotions. To truly master this, you must develop a heightened sense of self-awareness. When you enter a high-stakes conversation, monitor your own internal defenses. Are you feeling frustrated because the other person is not agreeing with you? That is your own defensive armor hardening. If you cannot control your own reactivity, you have already lost the influence battle. The master of human nature remains calm, detached, and observant. They view the other person's resistance not as a personal failure, but as a fascinating data point in the landscape of human psychology. Your goal is to become the calm center of every storm. By staying patient, validating the perspectives of others and guiding them through indirect influence. You create a social environment where you are the most trusted and influential person in the room. You stop wasting your energy trying to break down walls and start spending your time building bridges. When you master this law, you gain the ability to navigate through the most stubborn conflicts with grace, ensuring that your long-term influence remains secure. This is how you move from being a reactive participant to a master of your social environment, leaving the impulsive, defensive behavior to those who have not yet learned the game.